Welcome back to Sissy Maya. Make sure to subscribe to our channel to never miss an update. Additionally, consider subscribing to my Patreon to get access to these features, and much more.
Absolutely not. But my dear. No. Your stance is entirely unreasonable, you know. Oh really? I'm the unreasonable one. And what does that imply about you? This isn't the first occurrence. Exactly. I've had my fill. No. I'll resort to throwing objects. Aha! Now we're resorting to threats of tantrums, are we? How unladylike. You were well aware you weren't marrying a lady. Absolutely. And what's the significance of that? Forget about it. Just making sure. Megan placed 2 hot plates on the table, and for a brief moment, they both pretended to be engrossed in their food. Only when Joseph finally got up to pour 2 glasses of beer, Megan decided that the tension had eased sufficiently. Listen, she said, let's reset. You're obviously upset about it, and I can't understand why. It's just another session of the circle, for heaven's sake. You're fully informed. I've never kept it a secret, have I? What's the issue? Yeah, and why does the darn circle have to convene here ? And every darn week, too? Megan let out a carefully measured sigh, enough to convey irritation, but not so much as to incite more shouting. Joseph, please. I've explained. Our place happens to be the most suitable by far star. For miles and miles around. It's just how geography worked out. We've been over this before you moved in with me, remember? Joseph felt his anger soften, replaced by a stubborn resolve to assert himself. I don't mind the blasted circle meeting here, damn it. But I do mind being kicked out of my own home every time it decides to gather. It was supposed to be a few times a year, remember? And how many times has it been in the past months? Come on. Enlighten me. Megan allowed herself another sigh, making a mental note not to overdo it. Darling, I'm sorry. You know we've been facing difficulties. It's really not my fault, as you're well aware. It won't last forever. No. So how long will it last? I wish I knew. All I can do is hope. And in the meantime, you boot me out of my own house practically every week for an entire night. And you're surprised when I get upset. They ate in tense silence for a while. Finally, Joseph pushed his plate away, leaned back in his chair, and stated, I apologize for raising my voice, but I mean it. I won't spend another night in a cheap hotel. You never do. And don't interrupt me. The answer is no, and that's final. Despite everything, Megan couldn't help but wince. Joseph knew just as well as she did that she wouldn't coerce him into compliance, even if she had the means to do so. He couldn't be certain the same applied to the rest of the circle. And have you thought about how my guests would react to that? She asked, her tone angry. They're guests remember? There are protocols for that. Joseph had a valid point, but Megan wasn't entirely sure if individuals like Amelia would adhere to traditional etiquette before expressing their disapproval in some unfortunate manner. Not that it mattered. Furthermore, Joseph continued, sensing his temporary advantage, what they don't know won't harm them. To his surprise, it was clearly the wrong thing to say. Megan simply looked at him, her expression conveying volumes about the foolishness of his last remark. Joseph returned her glare until Megan stood up to clear the empty plates from the table. Do you want a yogurt? She asked from the fridge. What flavors do we have left? Only apricot. Sounds good. I'll have one. Megan fetched 2 yogurts and 2 spoons before settling back at the table. Darling, if you're considering hiding in the house, you're mistaken. Your masculine energy would stand out unmistakably even if I concealed you in the cellar behind 3 locks. Masculine energy, feminine energy. They're just labels you attach to your abilities. Things are what they are. Nonsense. And if my masculine energy stands out so much, disguise it somehow. You're supposed to be a witch, after all. Megan opened her mouth and then closed it abruptly. She felt like laughing, but refrained. She felt like many other things too, crying being one of them, and that would have been even worse. So she regarded Joseph thoughtfully instead. I could, you know. So, what's the issue? You do that, I get a peaceful night's sleep, and everyone's content. I should have protested sooner. Women. With a smug expression, Joseph dipped his spoon into the yogurt. He was pleased with himself. Megan ate in silence. Finally, as she finished the last spoonful, she said, You truly want me to do that? Joseph looked up. It was typical of Megan to start wavering almost immediately. The classic female tactic: if you don't want to do something, convince your man that he thinks it's not a good idea. He had to stand his ground. But why did he feel like he was about to lose the argument after all? Yeah, why not? He asked challengingly. Because the only way I can mask your masculine energy is by temporarily imbuing you with feminine energy. Joseph appeared nonchalant. Yeah, so you're resorting to semantics again. She wasn't going to persuade him this time. So that would essentially transform you into a woman for a while. Understand? Joseph stared. Megan smirked. She seemed convinced she had him, and to some extent, she wasn't entirely wrong. It was exasperating, and Joseph squared his shoulders, saying, So? Maybe I've secretly yearned for femininity all these years. Hiding in the shadows, you know. Megan laughed, rose from her seat, disposed of the yogurt containers, dropped the spoons into mugs filled with water by the sink. Then she walked behind Joseph's chair, running her fingers through his hair. You're a terrible liar, and you know it, she said, tilting his head back and planting an upside-down kiss on his nose. Joseph grinned up at her. But, she continued, you've shown disrespect towards my craft, and this supposed to be a witch remark should really teach you a lesson. She released Joseph and retreated to the sink. He stood and strolled over to the teapot, reaching past Megan to fill it with water and switch it on. However, on a serious note, he began. Megan turned around and silenced him with a finger on his lips. Not a word. It's settled. Joseph's mouth opened, and then closed again. He found himself uncertain about how to respond. Was she expecting him to protest? He knew full well what his wife was capable of. He had witnessed enough evidence of her powers, even without the formidable influence of the circle. But it had always been an unwritten rule in their relationship that Megan never used her magic against him. Had he pushed things too far this time? How so? It couldn't have been such a big deal for her. Seeing the uncertainty in his eyes, Megan chuckled and approached him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her forehead against his. You big baby, she teased. Are you afraid I'll do something against your will? No, no. Of course not. Joseph replied, swallowing nervously. But you did somewhat agree to it. Only before you explained the consequences. Megan pressed closer to him, amused but not surprised to feel Joseph's arousal. So you didn't mean it? No. Not really. What do you mean, not really? I mean, no. Then why, whispered Megan, nibbling his earlobe, are you so aroused by it? I'm not. Well, I mean, why wouldn't I be aroused when my wife presses against me like this and starts nibbling my earlobes? I must say, darling, you're a terrible liar. She leaned in to whisper in his ear again. Here's the deal, okay? Say yes, and I'll transform you into the most stunning woman imaginable, your ultimate fantasy come true. You already are my ultimate fantasy. Liar. Liar. You think flattery will get you anywhere, don't you? This is absurd. You're the one being absurd. No, I'm not. Oh yes, you are. I'm presenting you with the solution you've been seeking, and it's delightfully naughty too. I wish it had occurred to me earlier. You'll have a night at home, and we both get to see your ideal woman. It's only for the night anyway. You can revert to yourself as soon as they leave. And I'm supposed to believe this. What's the point of meeting my dream partner and not being able to be intimate with her? Joseph, chuckled Megan, now feeling quite confident. I'm certain you'll figure out a way around that. Come on, don't tell me you have one of those fragile male egos that shatter at the mere suggestion of an unconventional experience. I wouldn't have loved you if you did. The kettle, which had been emitting steam for a while, finally switched off on its own. They both disregarded it. Listen, Megan. No. Can't you see it's not right? Megan began to shake her head, but Joseph persisted. Look, I know myself well enough. Please, hear me out. It's not that. Don't you think I realize that my ideal partner is actually a ludicrous concept? That level of self-awareness from Joseph caught Megan off guard. Well, it simplified matters all for the better. She tilted her head thoughtfully and said, You have a valid point there. Too much of a good thing isn't necessarily wonderful. Well, there you have it. It was a nice thought, but I have another idea. I completely understand your perspective. Okay. It might be more challenging for me, but it's an intriguing proposition. Suppose I transform you into the woman you'd aspire to be if you were one. How about that? Megan felt gratified as she sensed Joseph's arousal growing once more. There was something in his masculine psyche that relished the notion of becoming female. Strange, but convenient. Perhaps it was a trait common among men, she mused ruefully. Isn't that a bit circular? Joseph questioned doubtfully. Not having been one, I have no idea. Well, neither do I. Makes it more intriguing, doesn't it? Leave the how to me. Come on, darling. I'm intrigued now. And I know you're intrigued too. I know you too well not to see it. She embraced Joseph, and he reciprocated. Megan could practically sense Joseph pondering it over in his mind, and she didn't hesitate to bolster his arousal with subtle movements of her body. When Joseph eventually released the embrace, no words were needed. They both knew he had agreed. It should hardly astonish a perceptive reader that on that particular night, their lovemaking was exceptionally passionate and fulfilling for both parties. Setting a new precedent, we won't dwell on the specifics. Yes, tomorrow. Lily's tone carried an unusual hint of excitement, Amelia noted disapprovingly. Very well, she responded. I'll ensure everyone is present and focused for tomorrow's meeting. We'll require all our strength and concentration. I shouldn't be surprised. Are we still meeting at Barbara's first? Lily's voice sounded anxious. Yes, as planned, Amelia confirmed before decisively ending the call. Lily was undeniably starting to grate on her nerves. They were all on edge ever since the unfortunate loss of Jane in that unexpected attack. For once, though, things seemed to be taking a positive turn. It would be a relief not to be in charge again. In the morning, Megan slipped out of bed early, despite Joseph's protests. Quit your grumbling. I have some special preparations to attend to, as you're well aware, she said, planting kisses on both of his nipples, trailing her hand down his stomach to briefly tend to his erection, and then she was gone. Joseph allowed himself to drift back into semi-consciousness, but soon found himself engaged in a mental dialogue, hidden behind closed eyes. What on earth have I allowed myself to be persuaded into? He pondered. An adventure, came the response. Am I truly going to let her go through with this? He questioned himself. It appears so, he reasoned. Does this mean I'm gay? Doesn't seem like it, he concluded. The whole idea is preposterous, he remarked. Indeed. Life has its absurd moments, he acknowledged. Just picture myself in the mirror. True. But afterward. She believes it's worthwhile. Do I believe her? I think I do. I wonder what I'd look like. I wonder too. There's no other way to find out, is there? No other way. Well, I could always indulge in fantasies. But I know my fantasies don't necessarily align with reality. Exactly. Let's see. Large breasts. Yes. But. Shudder. On me. Yes, perhaps. Plus a sizable rear end. Plenty of curly hair. Indeed. Blonde hair, perhaps. No. Wait. Picture it as *me star. Don't be absurd. Fair point. So why am I feeling aroused? Because I've just fantasized about an attractive woman. But not myself. Correct. Forget it then. I'll never know otherwise, will I? No. But what if she prefers me this way? Do I trust her that much? I believe I do. Indeed. Well, that settles it. Damn it all. What a unmanly thing to agree to. I disgust myself. It's mutual. Megan spent the entire day engrossed in her preparations, while Joseph, somewhat bewildered by the upcoming evening, busied himself in the garden, which demanded considerable attention regardless. Emerging from her dimly lit workroom in the mid-afternoon, Megan settled herself in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and some biscuits. Joseph wandered in from the garden shortly after, taking a seat at the table with his own mug of coffee. You might want to avoid eating, Megan advised. We'll need to start soon, and a sudden change might upset your stomach. Do you really want to go through with this? Joseph asked, sipping his coffee with a sense of unreality. I'm not about to let all that effort go to waste. You're not having second thoughts, are you? Fainting or something equally absurd? She teased. That would be unmanly. Hopefully, you're not experiencing an unexpected surge of macho pride. I'm just not sure, Joseph confessed with a sigh. It's a lot to process on such short notice. He stared mournfully into his coffee. You'll handle it just fine, my dear. That's one of the things I admire about you, Megan reassured him, placing her hand over his on the table. You're feeling low right now because you feel foolish without good reason, I might add. She finished her coffee and stood up. Well, there's no time like the present, she declared. You'd better go and take a quick shower. I need you to be clean. But make it snappy. I can't say for sure how long it'll take. Okay, Joseph replied, rising from his seat and feeling more foolish than ever. And don't bother dressing after the shower, Megan added as she reached the door. I need you without clothes. Amelia ceased twirling her bracelet on the table and fixed Lily with a sharp gaze. Are you absolutely certain she managed to get him to agree to it? You understand how crucial this is. Though Lily attempted to appear even more befuddled than usual, Amelia saw through the facade. Behind that facade of confusion lay one of the most astute minds in the world. Lily nodded, her hands fumbling ineffectively with her disheveled bun of hair. Yes. He's given his consent. He's intrigued. You really should consider a ponytail, Amelia remarked snidely, pushing her teacup away and rising from her seat in a rustle of grey silk. We ought to depart, if for no other reason than to be on standby. Is everyone prepared? Barbara, my dear, I'll have to gift you some of my herbal tea. She closed her eyes, partly to avoid the venomous glare from Barbara, and focused, shutting out the sounds of the circle members rising from their chairs and sofas. By all the powers that be, she silently exclaimed, this had better succeed. I'm exhausted from trying to manage this chaotic situation. As the moon is my witness, I never sought this responsibility. Come in. Megan beckoned without turning around in response to the knock on the door. Joseph entered the room and closed the door behind him. Typically, this space was off-limits to him, just as his study was off-limits to Megan, to avoid unnecessary arguments. The room was cluttered with cabinets and work surfaces, barely leaving enough space in the center for the white pentagram meticulously painted on the floor. The area within the points of the pentagram was covered in carefully chalked, seemingly meaningless scrolls, presumably the result of Megan's preparations. 5 small incense burners were placed at the corners of the pentagram, and Megan was meticulously measuring the distances between them. As always, Joseph half expected to see bubbling flasks and glass tubes filled with colorful liquids, and he couldn't help feeling a childish disappointment that there were none. Despite the room being filled with objects, little of it looked remotely witchy or even remotely magical. If it weren't for the pentagram on the floor and the incense burners positioned precisely at its 5 points. Straightening from her measurements, Megan appeared satisfied, and she had to suppress a smile. Joseph looked incredibly apprehensive standing there, clutching the towel wrapped around his waist. "Drop that towel over there and step into the center," she gestured toward the pentagram. "Just be careful not to step on any of the markings. You're not feeling shy, are you?" she teased with a smile as Joseph turned away to remove the towel. "If your body is feeling excited, all the better." Joseph discarded the towel and moved toward the center of the room, his nakedness revealing a semi-arousal and goosebumps. Stepping into the inner pentagon of the design, he turned to face Megan with a silent "Now what?" written on his face. "Do you want to watch?" Megan inquired, and when Joseph hesitated, she added, "You probably won't see any details anyway, it'll be almost dark in here. But there should be some special effects worth seeing." Joseph nodded abruptly, unable to trust himself to speak. "All right," Megan continued, "face the door, spread your legs as wide as you can without touching any lines, and lift your arms up and slightly sideways. No, not in front of you. Good. Now, don't panic. I'm about to immobilize you. It's to ensure you don't get hurt." Joseph attempted to nod but found himself unable to. It wasn't that anything prevented him from nodding, he simply couldn't muster the willpower to make the effort. That, as far as he was concerned, was the frustrating aspect of his wife's witchcraft. Most of the time, there was no outward sign that she was doing anything at all, and half the time, one ended up wondering if she was doing nothing at all, merely allowing verbal suggestions to do the work. But this time, there was definitely some witchcraft involved. He was certain he wouldn't feel as comfortable in this position otherwise. Megan ignited the braziers and switched off the electric light, casting the room into a flickering semi-darkness. Uttering something polysyllabic and obscure, she caused the braziers to flare briefly, their light now reflecting off a large mirror surface that replaced the door. In it, Joseph could discern his reflection in a vague imitation of the classic Leonardo position. With another sharp word, the braziers began emitting copious aromatic smoke, reducing the meager light in the room to a mere glow. "My goodness," Joseph mused, "she's actually going to do it. Unless she's bluffing, by the time she's finished with me, I'll be a woman." To his dismay, his male organ eagerly responded to the notion. Suddenly, the air around him shimmered with a bluish glow, which swiftly descended to the floor, coalescing into a bright circular band encircling him. A faint tinkling filled the room, and the band of light dimmed, revealing that the room was bathed in a reddish, directionless illumination. It cast no shadows, rendering everything appearing flat and unnatural. His eyes gradually adjusted to the dimness, enabling him to see his reflection clearly in the mirror. Megan was somewhere behind him to the right, unseen and silent. For what felt like several minutes to Joseph, nothing happened. Then he noticed the band of dim light slowly ascending. His gaze was fixated on the movement, and only when the band rose above his knees did he observe the change it left behind. While his legs above the band retained their usual dark hair, none was visible below. Though he anticipated changes, it took Joseph some time to convince himself that his eyes weren't deceiving him. By the time the wave of change approached his groin, he realized the inevitability of the transformation. As the band of light traversed his pubic region, obscuring any visible alterations, he could still sense his male organ throbbing with anticipation, like a phantom limb. Surprisingly, as the transformation progressed, Joseph could still discern his male organ, now seemingly hairless, protruding between a pair of shapely, feminine legs. Well, Joseph thought, that's a relief. Yet, he felt a twinge of regret mingled with an eagerness to jest with Megan about the shortcomings of her magical endeavor. When the change reached his neck, there was no doubt left. After the band of light passed, Joseph's body assumed feminine proportions, devoid of all body hair. However, his masculinity remained apparent, albeit somewhat incongruous. Though his nipples appeared slightly larger, his chest remained as flat as ever. As the band lifted over his head, it became evident that his face acquired a somewhat androgynous appearance. Combined with his masculine haircut, it fell short of truly feminine. "All right," Joseph muttered to himself. "Show's over. Apologies, Megan, my dear." Just then, the band of light above his head blazed like a flare, crashing down to the floor with a bone-jarring thud before instantly dimming again. Blinking rapidly to dispel the bright after-images, Joseph gazed ahead. Reflected in the mirror before him was a curvaceous, dark-haired beauty, sprawled out in front of him. Before he could process the sudden transformation, a deep voice resonated above him, uttering "AUM" as the band of light shot upward, flared, and crashed back down. This time, Joseph instinctively shut his eyes to shield them from the intense light. When he opened them again, he was met with the image of a stunning Nordic blonde reflected in the mirror. "Is this me?" he inwardly gasped. With another AUM followed by a flare and crash, the reflection morphed into a petite redhead with a button nose and a plethora of freckles. The reflections flickered through various female archetypes with increasing speed, gradually shedding the initial doll-like appearance. Then, with a final harem, all went dark. It was only then that Joseph's physical sensations caught up with his consciousness, and they were profoundly unfamiliar. He felt a cascade of hair cascading down his back, the weight pulling his head backward. The sensation of, presumably, breast on his chest sent waves of excitement radiating from his nipples. Most strikingly, there was a sense of lightness and emptiness between his legs. His skin felt foreign, his lungs too full, and his mind reeled with the absolute certainty that he was no longer a man, but a woman. As the immobilization spell dissipated, Joseph slumped heavily to the floor. Megan sank into her chair, despondency evident in her posture. After a prolonged silence, she spoke with a wretched tone, keeping her eyes lowered. "I'm sorry. I just can't do it. He didn't react at all, and I can't bear to continue. How could I? I look at him in that body, and..." Her voice faltered, overcome with emotion. "Don't you see?" Amelia was taken aback by the palpable anguish emanating from Megan. Despite her prepared words, they seemed inadequate in the face of Megan's distress. It would have been easy to exert control over her, to enforce compliance, but Amelia knew it wouldn't solve anything. What needed to be done had to come from Megan willingly, or not at all. An uncomfortable silence hung in the air as Amelia struggled to find the right words, aware of the expectant gazes of the rest of the circle upon her. They weren't accusatory looks, not yet, but rather filled with anticipation. Unexpectedly, Maria spoke up, breaking the tension. "Child," she began gently, "we understand. Perhaps not all of us equally, but we do understand, believe me. Yet our need is dire, and your suffering, though genuine, is something we can alleviate. Trust us. Trust us once more." She turned to Amelia, her statement left unfinished. Amelia nodded, silently acknowledging Maria's support. "Indeed," she thought, "a friend indeed." Aloud, she asserted, "Very well. We must proceed with the final step. Megan, dear, my heart goes out to you. You must summon your courage, your joy, and, above all, your persuasiveness. Through you, we will succeed." As long as her words sounded resolute and confident, that would suffice. Maria rose from her seat and approached Megan, who sat slumped and defeated. With a gentle touch, Maria placed her hands on Megan's left shoulder and forehead. "Come, my child," she said softly. "It is for love, as you well know. What else is there but love?" They would have been absolutely livid. Megan exclaimed with a giggle, running her fingers over Joseph's chest. "I was genuinely terrified when Amelia first appeared. She seemed to sniff around as if she suspected something." Joseph squirmed, surprised by how enjoyable the sensation was despite the intimacy they had shared earlier. Women really did experience intimacy differently, after all. "I'm sorry I put you at risk of getting into trouble," he said. "Seems like I wasted your efforts." "Wasted? Oh dear. I thought you were having a good time." "Well, yes. It's definitely different, that's for sure. And I'm glad it happened, in a way. But I would have enjoyed it just as much as a man. But not for as long. And now we know what kind of woman you'd be comfortable being," Megan teased. "Fair point. Maybe not as attractive as I would have hoped. Nonsense. Absolutely stunning. Rubbish. Balderdash. Laughing, Megan collapsed on top of him. Not at all, she exclaimed, playfully sliding her hand between his thighs and slipping a finger between the lips of his female organ. Does it feel very different? She asked curiously. Oh, it does. But. No, don't stop. Joseph interrupted, pulling her head towards him for a long kiss. But what? Megan asked, pulling away. Is it because you're a man experiencing being a woman? Joseph pondered for a moment. I suppose that might play a part. I'm not sure. Would you like to truly experience what it's like for a woman? What do you mean? You've already transformed me into one, remember? Replacing yang with yin and all that. Sweetheart, I must confess it wasn't as thorough as I had hoped. That's why I nearly panicked when Amelia started investigating. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to do anything about it. What? What are you talking about? Joseph propped himself up on one elbow and examined himself. Are you saying this is just an illusion? Oh, no, not at all. What I mean is, this form is unfamiliar to you. Well, of course. What did you expect? Was I too clumsy for you as your temporary female lover? Is that it? Well, you can. His anger faltered as he realized Megan was doubled over with laughter. Well, what's so funny? What do you mean, what's so funny? It's just so typical of you. Demonstrating it perfectly. I may have changed your appearance, but you're still the same underneath. I didn't anticipate this. Did you? Well, naturally. It's to be expected. In fact, you are the one who's currently defying nature. A man with a woman's body. Though it does make for a delightful lesbian plaything. But, remember, I wanted to understand the kind of woman you'd aspire to be if you were female, and that goes beyond mere appearance. I'm still curious. I can see where this is going. Aren't you intrigued? Are you suggesting there's more to explore? How would I know? Pondered Megan. Your responses suggest there might be. This is starting to sound like a cheesy porno fantasy. You have someone else, so you're turning me into a woman to erase my male identity. And you'd believe that? Joseph contemplated. No, he finally replied. I don't know why, but no, I wouldn't. So let me try it. Just for the remainder of the night. I promise. Joseph ran his hands over his unfamiliar form. Why not, he thought. Might as well go all in. I assume you're leading me to your secret chamber, he said cautiously. Nope. In your current state and with your consent, it shouldn't be a challenge. Just relax and close your eyes. Joseph complied, whispering so softly that Megan could barely hear. I trust you, my love. It was fortunate that he kept his eyes shut, sparing him from seeing the tears welling in Megan's eyes, despite Maria's efforts. She kissed Joseph gently on the forehead, gliding her finger along his smooth cheek, and directed a fervent thought at the circle. Make it happen, damn it. Make it happen. And make it right. She jolted awake, swiftly orienting herself in her surroundings before addressing the air. All right, Amelia, she declared. You can stop skulking by that door. There was a dual gasp, one from Amelia and the other. Her eyes snapped open, locking onto the gaze of the nude woman kneeling beside her. Her mental defenses sprang up, but crumbled upon recognition. Mark. What in the world? Megan collapsed onto her, overcome with tears. As Amelia entered the room, Jane snapped at her. This was your plan, wasn't it? Unfazed by the sight of two naked women, Amelia pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down carefully. Yes, Jane, she confirmed. Welcome back. The rest of the circle gradually entered the room. Jane scrutinized their expressions and auras, piecing together the events. Then she wrapped her arms around the woman on top of her. You allowed them to do that to you, she whispered. For me. We had no other choice, Jane, Amelia explained. You understand that. It was either that or you remained Joseph permanently, powerless and unaware. Mark was desperate to have you back. As were. She paused briefly, all of us. Jane held Amelia's gaze for a moment before breaking into a smile. Well, you have me back now. Leave me alone with my husband. Blessed be the mother, Amelia thought, her spirit infused with moonlight. Blessed be the moon, and the swan, and the dancer. The weight of decisions has been lifted from me. Jane remained still, listening to the circle depart until the sound of the closing front door signaled their exit. Then she focused her attention on the person in her arms. Mark, she said softly. Megan. My love. How can I ever repay you? Gently, she lifted her husband's tear-stained face and kissed him. You can return to being a man tomorrow, but for now, let us revel in this moment. Morning arrived, bringing with it the ritual of breakfast, black coffee and croissants with jam. Yeah, Megan remarked, licking the jam from her fingers. It was rough at the beginning. I nearly lost it. But then Amelia did her thing, the personality overlay. Jane nodded knowingly. She's quite skilled at that. I assume she did the same for me, convincing Joseph he'd always been married to Megan. Exactly, Megan confirmed. She said she could only enhance what was already there, without risking harm by contradicting the personality imposed on you. But with my consent, she crafted a complete female identity for me. I can imagine Amelia relished that opportunity. She's always had a bit of a peculiar streak, Jane remarked. How long did she keep you under? Surely it wasn't constant. Well, I started recalling who I was and why after about 6 months, but Amelia didn't rush to remove the overlay all at once. She allowed it to gradually weaken over several months. I can't pinpoint exactly when it disappeared completely, maybe a year in total. Why? You seem concerned. Was it risky? You could say that. So you were fully yourself, waiting for an opportunity for nearly another year after that. Megan considered it. Seems that way. It doesn't feel like it's been that long. Time flies. I nearly fell apart towards the end, though. When we restored your original form and it didn't affect the Joseph personality at all, I almost lost it. Maria had to work hard to get me back on track for that final push, she admitted, pouring herself more coffee, her hands trembling slightly. I feel guilty about it, you know. About deceiving Joseph at the end. If I hadn't been certain it was you, just distorted mentally. Don't blame yourself, Jane reassured her. Joseph is still here. I remember being him. She winced. I'll always remember being him. But what about you? Amelia didn't remove your overlay all at once, you said. Yes, that's true. Is it a problem? I wondered. I wasn't going to mention it, but... Let me guess. Jane took a large sip of coffee to mask her concern. You're unsure if you want to revert to being Mark again. I had a feeling there might be something like that. Your aura is remarkably feminine. Well, Megan blushed. It's not that simple. Yes, I've grown accustomed to this body and being a woman. No, I wouldn't mind being a man again, although it might feel awkward initially. Despite her concern, Jane was intrigued. So, is it about something intimate? Not entirely. Yes, it's different, of course. Less urgent, less intense, more encompassing, more like a flow than an act. But I enjoyed it just as much as a man, albeit differently. It's, well, you know, how should I put it? Megan hoped Jane would understand her meaning, and Jane, being Jane, did. It's the power, then, Jane marveled quietly. You were that proficient. Yes, Megan admitted with relief. And yes, Barbara thought I caught on pretty quickly to that gender change spell I cast on you. She paused, noticing Jane's astonished expression. Yes. Let me get this straight. You cast the gender change spell? By yourself? Well, Megan squirmed with embarrassment. They did provide the shielding. Was it too much of a risk? But Jane burst into laughter. You silly thing. It might be just a fancy gender change, but for a beginner. She shook her head in amazement. It was the same old lesson. Intuition wasn't worth much if one fell for the obvious trap. It was glaringly obvious that Barbara and Angela were assisting Megan behind the scenes, yet she hadn't stopped to question the automatic assumption, despite the dramatic performance. But once the realization struck, Jane's laughter subsided. So, when did they realize you had power? I don't know. It must have been during the first few months, while the overlay was still strong. My memories of that time are fuzzy, but as I began to remember myself, I could already manage some minor things. Which is why Amelia allowed the overlay to merge into your aura. Waste not, want not. Utilize your abilities where possible. Damn her. I might do the same, but damn her anyway. Megan flinched at Jane's intensity. I think she made the right call, she defended. I can't imagine how else I would have coped. Jane sighed. Perhaps, but I'll still give her a hard time for this. She walked over to the window and gazed into the garden for several minutes. I'll miss Mark, she confessed eventually. Though I'll have you, of course. I hope. So, you wouldn't mind? Megan approached cautiously. After all, I am Mark. I still am. It's just that I'm also Megan now, to a significant extent. Oh, my dear, Jane said, turning to Megan and taking her hand. Of course you are. I would recognize your essence anywhere, just as I did when you broke the spell. You're yourself, even if that self has a different gender. After everything you've done for me, how could I object? She grinned weakly. As long as you're willing to accept me as your lesbian plaything, of course. Megan wasn't surprised when Jane enveloped her in a hug and tears welled up in her eyes. If you're curious. As expected, they found their happily ever after. And yes, they did have children, but it's not your concern who the fathers were. Megan's power grew to match Jane's, and she became a formidable force in the Circle's ongoing battle against the adversary, just as Jane had predicted. But that, as they say, is another tale altogether.